Welcome back aboard the Strange Express. My name is Dr. Scherzo Stantio. Please take a seat and make yourself comfortable, if you can. Today I'm going to be presenting part 1 of a 3-part story called The Vampire. I'll be sharing that story with you in just a moment. However, I believe that the engineer has just given the signal that we're on our way. Nathan grew up in the southern United States. He was not from a wealthy family. In fact, by most standards, they were a poor family. But growing up, Nathan was never aware that his family was poor. And in his mind, they were actually rich. His father worked in the mines. While they did not have a lot of luxuries, the family never lacked for food or a home to live in. Nathan's family, composed of his parents, 2 sisters, and a brother, all lived in a house that had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room. They're a close family by anyone's standards. Nathan's siblings were well separated in age from Nathan. His older sister was 8 years his senior. His brother was 7 years his senior. His younger sister was 5 years younger than he was. Nathan's primary playmate as a child was his cousin, Isaiah, who was about 6 months older than Nathan. The boys were inseparable. Now, Isaiah's family lived about 2 miles away from Nathan, down an old hard-packed clay road that meandered around and over a hill with thick woods on both sides of the road. There was only one house between Nathan and Isaiah's family, and it belonged to old Mrs. Alexander, the widow. Nathan and Isaiah would meet each other each day, usually near Mrs. Alexander's house, as it lay halfway between their homes. During school time, they would meet after school, and after chores were done, and ride their bikes up and down the hill, or go out in the woods and target practice with their BB guns at tin cans lined up along a log. While there, they would sometimes try to secretly smoke cigarettes that Isaiah had sneaked from his parents' house. When summer came, they practically lived outdoors, camping in the woods that were behind Nathan's house and occasionally in the backyard at Isaiah's house. This was years ago, and in a time that was considered to be safer than today. Nevertheless, the unthinkable happened when Nathan was 14 years old. It was on a hot summer night in early August. They were camping out in the woods behind Nathan's house, and they were camping deeper in the woods than they had ever camped before. They planned to get up just before dawn and go fishing at a nearby lake, and sometime around 6 a.m., Isaiah shook Nathan awake. Nathan started to ask Isaiah why he had woke him up, but Isaiah put one hand over Nathan's mouth, and with his other hand he put his finger to his lips, signaling Nathan to keep quiet. "I hear something, or someone outside," Isaiah whispered in a barely audible voice. Nathan sat up and listened. He too could clearly hear the sound of something, or someone, walking in the woods outside the tent, moving closer with each step, and each footstep causing a slight crunching sound. Then suddenly, it seemed to stop. It felt like minutes, and Nathan noticed Isaiah sliding his single-shot .22 rifle from the bag where he kept it. It was the only weapon that they had other than their old BB guns. At that moment, the footsteps were heard again. This time, though, they seemed to be moving away from the tent. It sounded as though the thing had walked up to the tent, paused a moment, and then kept on walking. Nathan and Isaiah looked at each other. Whatever had approached their tent carried with it the smell of death. Isaiah said to Nathan, "Let's follow it and see what it is." Nathan looked at his cousin and said, "Are you crazy? I think we should pack up and go home." Isaiah answered, "We have to find out what it was. Will you ever feel safe again camping out here if we don't find out what it was?" That thought had occurred to Nathan, and he had already decided that they should probably camp closer to home, or better yet, over at Isaiah's house for a while. "Isaiah, I don't know if I really want to know what it was," Nathan replied. "I'm sure it was some kind of animal. I don't like the way it smelled either, like a fresh kill," he added. "Well, I'm going to go see what it was." The footsteps didn't sound like an animal, and if it was an animal, I want to find out what kind it was. If you don't want to go with me, you don't have to, Isaiah said, while stuffing the Band-Aid tin that contained the 22 bullets into his back pocket and putting the rifle sling around his shoulder. Nathan crawled out of his sleeping bag and said, "I'll go with you. Give me a minute, put my shoes on." "Well, hurry," Isaiah answered. "If we wait too long, we may lose it." Nathan followed Isaiah out of the tent, but there was nothing in sight, man or animal. But there was a heavy dew on the ground, and it made the tracks fairly clear, and they led north, away from Nathan's house. Clearly they were the tracks of a human. Nathan called out to Isaiah, who was already following the tracks. "Isaiah, we can see the tracks that is a person, and I don't think it's a good idea to follow them." Isaiah turned to Nathan and said, "We don't have to catch up with him, but we should find out where he goes to." Nathan did not reply, but scurried to catch up with Isaiah. The moon had been bright that night. It was in its third quarter, but not quite full yet. At this hour, though, it had already set. The low light level, along with the long strands of Spanish moss that drooped from the trees, gave the scene an atmosphere that lent itself to the impending horror. Nathan sensed this, and while he did not want to catch up with the unknown person, he felt he could not let Isaiah go on by himself either. Nathan said to Isaiah, "If we do catch up with him, let's just see where he goes, and I'll tell my dad about him." Isaiah did not reply. The trail continued northward, and in a straight line. Soon it led them out of the woods and into an old cemetery. It was nearing 7 o'clock and the sky was starting to brighten, and it was light enough in the cemetery that they no longer needed flashlights. Suddenly Isaiah halted. "There he is." Nathan looked to where Isaiah pointed. He saw a big man standing still out in the cemetery. He was wearing a worn gray or gray-black jacket and black pants. His hair was long and stringy. He had a muscular build. He was just standing still with his back to the boys. Nathan whispered, "Let's not get any closer." Isaiah did not answer, but started walking forward. Nathan again spoke to Isaiah. "Don't you hear me? Let's not get any closer. This guy looks creepy." But his words were wasted as Isaiah continued his forward march. Nathan did not proceed, hoping that Isaiah would stop when he realized that he was alone. But Isaiah continued to walk toward the still figure. Then Nathan noticed that the man had moved. He had not seen him when he had turned around, but now he was facing them. The man was looking at them with eyes that glowed with a red color. Nathan had seen this before in nocturnal animals, but he had never seen it in a human. The man was a horrifying sight, but the glaring red eyes served to intensify the horror. It was now clear that he had focused his attention on Isaiah, who was closer to him. Isaiah had now halted. Nathan yelled at Isaiah, "Come on, let's ditch this guy." But again, Isaiah did not heed and continued to stand still. Nathan said, "I'm leaving, whether you do or not." Nathan turned and started running, and turned once more to see if Isaiah had followed his lead. But to his horror, the man was already on top of Isaiah, and his mouth was open, revealing a set of what appeared to be fangs. He could see that Isaiah was trying to get the rifle from his shoulder, but Nathan continued to run toward his home, as he knew it would be no match for the monster that was attacking Isaiah. As he ran, he heard the report of a rifle, and he hoped that Isaiah had been able to free himself from the thing. He had made it back into the woods, and fortunately the first beams of daylight were starting to stream in. Nathan continued running, even though he was breathing so hard that he had a pain in his side, and his throat had started to hurt. He ran all the way until he reached the edge of the woods that bordered on the field that was behind his house. He then ran through the rows of corn and into the backyard of his home. He went around to the front door and knocked. The door was answered by his mother, who asked why he was home so early. Nathan, still gasping from his long run, bellowed out that some man had attacked them and still had Isaiah. Nathan's mother got Nathan to give her the details, and she got on the phone and called the sheriff's department. About 45 minutes later, a deputy drove up and came to the house. He advised that they had dispatched another deputy to the cemetery, and they had found Isaiah. The deputy asked Nathan's mother if Isaiah was her son, and she told him that Isaiah was her sister's son, and then she asked if Isaiah was all right. The deputy said no, he is not all right. Nathan's mother asked if he is hurt badly, and the deputy told her that when they had arrived, that Isaiah was already dead. The deputy got the address for Isaiah's parents and said that he needed to go and let them know what had happened. A search for the killer was made, but he was not found. Bloodhounds were brought in, but the man's trail seemed to originate back in the woods, just before the place that Nathan and Isaiah were camping, and ended just a few feet beyond where Isaiah's body had been found. The detectives came and questioned Nathan several times to see if he could give them some clue to put them on the trail of the murderer, and he went over the details each time, but there was nothing in his story that gave them any assistance in finding the killer. All they had was the torn body of a 14-year-old boy, and no way to find the perpetrator of the awful crime. Unfortunately, Isaiah's family blamed Nathan for several years. It would not have anything to do with Nathan's family. Nathan was often melancholy as he too blamed himself for Isaiah's death. A few years later, after everyone had reconciled themselves to Isaiah's loss, it was still an open wound for Nathan. Isaiah was more like a brother to him than a cousin, and he still believed that he had tried harder to stop Isaiah that he wouldn't have died that day. On what would have been Isaiah's 20th birthday, Nathan resolved to find the monster that killed his cousin and bring him to justice. He began looking into how the man could have vanished without a trace, and what happened to the .22 rifle that was fired. Did Isaiah wound his attacker? What happened to the rifle? Nathan had not been back to the place where it happened since the morning that it occurred, as the memories were too painful. But now Nathan spent weeks combing through the woods and the cemetery, trying to find anything that might help him locate the killer. It seemed that with the passage of time that the trail was cold. One day, after walking the grounds of the cemetery and checking for a tree hollow where the rifle may have been stashed, it occurred to him to look into the mausoleums that he could get into, see if he could find one where the killer may have hid. In the fifth one he looked into, he found the rifle. It was in a corner leaning against the wall. The barrel showed signs of rust, but he knew it was Isaiah's rifle. He did not move it or touch it in the hope that there might be some fingerprints. Nathan went to the caretaker's office, and the caretaker called the sheriff's department. A deputy was sent, and he took the rifle. Nathan thought this was all very strange. How did the killer get from the murder scene to the mausoleum, which was more than 200 yards away? And yet the bloodhounds lost his scent just a few feet away from the murder scene. Why did he take the rifle? Why did he leave it in that mausoleum? It raised a lot of questions, but at least he had found a new solid clue, and hopefully he might soon know the identity of the killer. A week later, that hope would be squashed, as no identifiable prints were found. Nathan fell into a terrible funk. He was working a part-time job while attending Votech school, and he called in sick to both after receiving the news. That afternoon, a shiny black Ford pulled into Nathan's driveway. Nathan opened his door to the man, and the man introduced himself to Nathan as Charles Chapman. He was a medium-sized man, dressed in a blue business suit with a matching blue tie. Nathan noticed he was wearing a dark fedora, which struck Nathan as odd, as very few businessmen wore hats anymore. The only men that Nathan knew that sported hats were men who worked outdoors in the sun. The man said he had been looking for Nathan. He said he represented a man named Norris Hunter, and that Mr. Hunter would like to meet Nathan, as he might be able to assist him in finding Isaiah's killer. He then handed Nathan a business card for Mr. Hunter. "You'll find Mr. Hunter's phone number on the card, and when you have time, please give him a call," Chapman said. He then touched the brim of his hat and headed back to his car. Nathan called out and said, "Who is Norris Hunter? And how does he know about me?" Chapman called back without even turning around. "Give him a call." Nathan watched as the black Crown Vic backed out of his driveway, crunching the gravel as it went, and sped down the road toward the highway. He then looked back at the card in his hand. The card was a plain white business card with black print. It contained Norris Hunter's name, address, phone number, and fax number, but no business was listed. Nathan contemplated the card for a moment, and then he turned from the doorway and went to the phone and called the phone number on Norris Hunter's business card. The call was answered on the second ring by a woman. Nathan told the woman that he was calling to speak to Norris Hunter. The woman asked him to hold for a moment. Then Nathan heard a click, and the strains of classical music came over the phone. About a minute later, a man's voice came on the line. "Hi, Nathan. I appreciate you giving me a call. I'm actually surprised that you called so soon, so I really appreciate you calling. What is this about, and what is it you want with me?" Nathan asked. "Well," Hunter replied, "I believe you're looking for the killer that murdered your cousin. Is that correct?" Nathan confirmed it was correct. "You and I have something in common, then. I'm looking for that monster, too. I believe we can pool our resources and bring that fiend's murderous days to an end." Nathan paused before answering and then said, "Mr. Hunter, I really don't know anything about you. For all I know, you may even be the killer, and you're trying to lure me into some trap." "That is understandable," Hunter replied. "Here's what I will do. I'll send Chapman back over to you with some newspaper clippings that should help you understand who I am and what my interest is in the killer. Nathan then heard Norris Hunter talking to someone else for a moment in the background, and then he came back to talk again. Okay, I'll be sending some newspaper clippings over to you so you'll know why I want to work with you in finding this monster. In the meantime, would it be okay for us to compare some notes? Nathan said, I really don't have any notes to compare. The man killed my cousin in Altree Hill Cemetery, then he disappeared without a trace. When he killed my cousin had a .22 rifle, but it was not found with my cousin. While searching the cemetery a week ago, I found a .22 in one of the old mausoleums. The sheriff's department took the gun to see if there were any prints, and they called me this morning and said that there were no identifiable prints on the gun. They even checked the empty shell that was still in the rifle, but they only found smudged prints, but they were most likely Isaiah's anyway. I just hope Isaiah was able to get that shot into him. Norris Hunter replied, It would not matter if he did. It wouldn't have hurt him. Nathan paused a moment, trying to understand what Hunter had just told him. I know that a .22 is not as powerful as a .38 or .45, but will definitely penetrate, and if placed well, it can severely injure or kill a man. That may be so, Hunter replied, but this monster is not a man. I don't want to get into details over the phone, but review the clippings that I am sending you and get back in touch with me as soon as you can. He may be on the move soon, and I don't want to lose him again. He can disappear for months at a time, and the sooner we stop him, the more lives we can save. I suspect that you don't understand exactly what we're dealing with. When we meet in person, I'll bring you up to speed. I see we will soon arrive at your station. I thank you very much for taking the Strange Express today. You've been very kind. Please return soon to hear part 2 of The Vampire. I personally don't care too much about vampire stories. In my mind, they always, suck. Don't get me wrong. I haven't always felt that way about vampire stories. The change came back when they did that TV show about a vampire that became a police detective. I thought he wanted to be like McGruff and take a bite out of crime, but later someone told me that he only joined because he heard that detectives do stakeouts. What's that you said? Don't quit my day job? Actually, it's a night job, and I would never quit it. I'm the head man at a cryogenic storage facility. As you leave, please subscribe, and if you feel the urge, leave a comment, and gently press the like button. I know, I listen to others who ask you to smash it, hit it, pulverize it, or even tickle the button. But I've been warned by my production company, Amateurish Productions, that it'll be my responsibility to replace any damaged like buttons, so please, just press it gently. So, until next time, happy rails to you.